Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to our distributed generation workshop at high voltage and extra high voltage. Today we are going to be covering a number of topics, as you can see on the agenda. In terms of a little bit of housekeeping, we have a number of presenters. Whilst people are presenting, we will be on video, but just to keep the bandwidth down, we shall go off video when we're not presenting. We do encourage questions and feedback, so if you have any questions or comments, then please either raise your hand, or if you put something in the chat, we will pick those questions up at a suitable time. And we will, of course, have an opportunity for you to ask any questions at the end of the session. What we will be doing as well is, as I say, feedback is really important to us. So I'm going to share a link with you on the chat. And this is asking for your comments on how useful each of the presentations are. So if you can, as you're going through the presentation, or at the end of the event, if you could fill that out, that would be hugely helpful, so thank you. Okay, in terms of the agenda, we shall be covering the ICE work plan for this year, giving you an update on where we are on each of those, each of our commitments. Then Brian Hoy will be doing a presentation on queue management, which has recently been implemented. Then we have Kate Stewart doing our flexible services update. And then back to Brian, who will be doing three sessions on our future business planning, covering some elements of Ofgem, which includes an update on their significant code review, our future business plans, and some details on the competition that Ofgem are rerunning. And then last but not least, we have Gavin Anderson, who will be giving you a presentation on National Grid's regional development plans. And then we have a small update on accelerated loss of mains, which has been a late addition, and then a chance for you to ask any questions of any of the presenters and anyone else who is also on. So in terms of who's on the event today, there's myself, Hannah Sharrett. We have with us Brian Hoy, who, as I say, will be doing a number of the presentations. Kate Stewart, who is our flexible services analyst, who will be giving you an update on flexible services, and Gavin Anderson, who's the connections team leader, will be talking about National Grid. In addition, we also have Stefan Jones and Victoria Brown and John Carlisle, who you can see has joined us as well. So I'm sure you all know Stefan Tor and John very well. They are available should you have any questions. Okay. So moving on to the ICE work plan update. So our work plan for this year includes a commitment on improving our application of queue management principles. And the idea behind this is to progress slow-moving projects, ensuring consistency with industry best practice. And as I mentioned, we will be covering that today. We also have a commitment to keep our stakeholders updated on the changes to charges which are being introduced by Ofgem, and that is the significant code review that again is also on our agenda today. And we will be having a webinar in August as well with a bit more detail. Then we've got the flexible services. As I say, Kate will give you a further update on that. And last on this slide is to keep you updated on our transition to distribution system operation. So in terms of where we're up to with that, we have published our DSO strategy and the analysis of our DSO functions, which links are available on these slides, which will be sent out after the event. And we'll also be providing a bit more of an update in our November workshop. Then we move on to these KPI type and the business as usual type commitments. So continue to communicate with our stakeholders. We've recently issued our first quarter newsletters, and obviously we'll keep you updated with emails as and when there is something we need to communicate. In terms of our events and our engagement with you, we are hosting, we plan to host 3 workshops this year, plus additional webinars. And we also have a commitment to deliver our surgery sessions. And this year we've made an extra commitment to hold those within 10 working days. So we put an SLA in terms of actually delivering our surgery sessions. Now, we're delighted to say that currently we are arranging and having our surgery sessions within 2 days of a request, which is excellent. Whilst we're on the topic of events, what I did want to just talk around it and get your thoughts on. So obviously with COVID-19, we have moved entirely online, hosting webinars via Teams for every single event that we do. Obviously, as we start to move out of some of the restrictions that COVID-19 has placed on us all, we're looking at what our future events should look like. At the moment, our thoughts are around delivering, obviously, this one online, and we have another one towards the end of this calendar year, which we are expecting to still to remain as an online event. But we are looking at what to do after the spring, obviously, if everything, if it is safe to do so, and looking at whether or not people would like us to start reintroducing face-to-face, or whether people would prefer to continue with the online option. So I would, if possible, open up just for any thoughts or comments. Okay. If you do have any thoughts, then just let us know through an email or at the end of the event, or give us a call. Moving on to the last 2. In terms of our time to quote, we target to do time to quote for both HV and EHV within 57 working days. Our HV are currently within target of 42 working days. Our EHV are slightly over target in that our average for this year so far is 60 working days. Now, we're aware that's slightly over target. We are confident we can pull it back. The reason behind it is we've had a significant number of quote applications, but we have recruited an additional person, so we are expecting that to come down over the coming months. Okay. So if you do need to get in touch, either myself or Amy are happy to receive your comments or questions, and we have a mailbox there available for you to send to. And without further ado, I shall pass over to Brian on queue management.
All right, good morning. This is going to be fun because at least you can see the slides and I can't, so this could be interesting. So if we go on to the first slide. So what I'm going to do is just take you through some slides. As you can see, I've actually pinched some of the slides from the E&A. So these were largely based on the slides used at a webinar a couple of months ago that the E&A ran, because these queue management principles are being rolled out across all the network companies, including National Grid as well, and as you'll see in a minute, went live at the beginning of July. So what we're talking about in terms of queue management, we're really here talking about the sort of effective management of contracted projects. So these are all the ones where people have accepted an offer, but maybe aren't progressing that quickly. And I suppose from a sort of industry point of view, trying to actually see that there is benefit to actually I suppose take action against the slow moving ones, because they have a detrimental impact on other customers. Either they're causing somebody down the queue to have paid for some reinforcement that maybe they would need to pay for if that project wasn't there, or feeding through into quotation, so that the people are getting more expensive quotation than otherwise would have been the case. So I suppose the principle is really trying to take some action against those projects that are slow moving, and that's the challenge in this whole area, is about trying to get the balance right between when is a project trying very hard but might be moving slow, and when is it just completely stagnated and the developer is not really progressing it, and it's particularly trying to challenge the later ones and actually take action against those. So some of this is based on, as you'll see, things that are in place. So the milestones and the ideas of milestones have been in for quite some time, but I think it's fair to say that all DNOs, whilst they've had milestones in place, have not been particularly proactive at actually challenging and actually terminating projects. And this piece of work that was sort of developed last year and went through sort of multiple industry consultations is to try and rectify that and actually make some progress to those. And what it's done is to introduce the sort of concept of tolerance, which is, as you see in a bit, is to say, well, okay, we set some milestones in good faith, rather than being completely strict that if you miss those by a day, we're going to terminate the project. The idea of tolerance is to give a bit of, as the name suggests, tolerance around those, to recognise that there are sometimes difficulties in projects, and to give a degree of flexibility around that, but not to be completely open-ended and actually to time limited it. and you'll see the kind of mechanics of that in a minute. Okay, so if we go on to the next slide, that's got the milestones on it. So these were originally developed in 2016, and I think are widely used by all the DNOs, and they just represent the kind of the key stages of a project from once a project's been accepted right through to the project's completely built out. And the main focus in a way is probably trying to focus on the early milestones, as they're called, which are the first the first few, which are measured from offer acceptance, because those are the ones where if somebody is trying to just hog the capacity and not actually progress the project, that's the cheapest end of it. Once a project gets into build, then I think people generally accept that actually the developer is actually committing significant amounts of money, and therefore is more likely to build out. So the aim is to flush out the early ones to try and actually make sure those are the ones that are not stagnating and causing more expensive offers to go out to other customers. Okay, go on to the next one. So this is the idea of tolerance, really. So it sets a time period, so where the milestone has got an absolute date, and for those early ones set from acceptance, this is kind of giving a bit of grace to it. So for LV and HV projects, it's effectively 3 months. It's measured in working days because it's a bit more precise to measure, but broadly 3 months, and 6 months for EHV and 132. So what that really says is it applies to a project where if it's not met those milestones, it gives you a grace period. So if it was an EHV project, and if you use the 6 months as an example, it gives that you've got 6 months sort of carryover, that if you're not met the milestone, but you're within the 6 month period, then actually the project is allowed to progress. It's used slightly differently in terms of the two, the kind of early and later milestones. So the early milestones, it's used in aggregate. So you've got kind of 6 months worth of slippage across any of those early milestones that can be applied. Once it gets into the kind of the build stage, then each milestone's got its own tolerance period. So it actually recognises a bit more flexibility there where it's actually in build. And the result and the output and the consequence is if you haven't met the milestones, and once you've used up your tolerance period, then the project will get terminated and the capacity released back in. So that's the idea of it, is to give that kind of, milestones communicated in advance, a bit of a grace period, but then if that's not met, then it will go to termination. Okay, so if you move on to the next slide. So this is one of the things that came out of some of the feedback sessions we've had through facilitated through the ENA. And there were some, there was a sort of a principle already in the original guidance about customers that are outside of customers' control, albeit they were kind of quite limited on things like force majeure and planning appeals, or if the network company actually causes the delay. The new one that's been added in red was actually some feedback on the, particularly for planning consent, the criteria are for EIA and non-EIA projects. And what some stakeholders fed back was that they were having to comply with the same sort of conditions in terms of surveys for birds, bats, bees, newts, etc., that you would for an EIA project, but they were being applied by lots of local authorities to non-EIA projects. And in the milestones, you get longer time period for the EIA projects. So this sort of, I suppose, exception and exemption was put in to allow you, if you're in that situation, to come back to DNO and let them know, and then that can be taken account of in setting the milestones, and they can be rebaselined. So that was a bit where there's been some useful feedback on that a situation that's probably changed maybe from 2016 when the original milestones were developed to give a bit of balance and reasonableness in them. Okay, go on to the next slide. So as I mentioned, this is a kind of a cross industry where it's been implemented concurrently. There's a bit of a build up there. It's got the date of the ENA webinar that was done in May, and then basically from the beginning of July, then all applications that are received after the 1st of July will be subject to these new and revised terms and conditions, and that should be happening across all the DNOs and National Grid this month. So I presume other DNOs are doing similar events like this to make people aware of them, of the change. I've gone to the last slide just to confirm what we're doing. So we're going to apply these new processes to all distributed generation applications greater than a megawatt, and that's anything that's come in from the beginning of July. So we've done it for a megawatt because that aligns with lots of our processes. Into the Appendix G process with National Grid. So it's a kind of a clear threshold that we use for lots of other things. So in terms of what we've done today, so anybody who's applied since the beginning of July will have had notification of this happening, where we would have sent out our normal letter in terms of informing of their liability for ND fees. We've included a note in about these queue management principles as well to it, so they've had explicit notification. And then when those offers actually go out, as Hannah said before, we're probably working on about 60 days at the minute, but in that roughly 3-month period, then the offers that go out will actually have some slight revisions to the terms and conditions, just to make reference to the queue management principles. And then there's just on the slide, obviously we'll be sending these out later and publishing them, but it's got some links both to the user guide that's been developed through the ENA, and also to a link to the ENA webinar that where we've taken most of these slides from, but actually goes through a little bit more detail, a little bit more with a few examples, if you need any more detail. Okay, any questions on any of that? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Now hand over to Kate to do her update on flexible services.
Hi everyone. So like Brian, I also can't see the slides, so you'll have to bear with. So yeah, I'll just ask Hannah to change the slides, but anyone who's new to flexible services, I'll just do a brief introduction for you. So what are flexible services? They're essentially when distributed energy resources, or DERs, which can be generators, consumers, and electrical storage connected to our network, they can either consume less or generate more when we ask them to due to a network constraint. They can also be used for managing things like planned outages or disruptive failures rather than just simple reinforcement. But essentially, it means that the requirement for electricity in the area is greater than the amount we're capable of providing. So we pay the DERs to provide us with this service. And a good example of what can lead to network constraints would be the football last night. So when pretty much the whole country were tuning into their televisions, yeah, things like that can lead to network constraints where we would request the help from DERs. Next slide, please, Hannah. So what are the benefits? Well, for the UK to meet its decarbonisation targets, we're expecting to see a huge uptake in low carbon technologies. So this includes things like electric vehicles, heat pumps, solar panels, which will lead to more demand being placed on our network. And this demand we weren't originally designed to cope with for low carbon technologies. Instead of going down the path of traditional reinforcement to meet this demand, that can be extremely costly, time consuming, and it can cause a lot of disruption. So we'd have to upgrade our assets such as substations, towers across our region, and that obviously causes road closures and supply interruptions. If we procure flexible services, it's a cheaper and faster way of balancing this supply and demand on our network. So that will allow us to utilise our existing assets to make the most out of the capacity we already have. And the money we save on this reinforcement is passed back to the customer. So that, that will be reflected in their cheaper energy bills. By not having to install these large assets, we can also help to reduce our CO2 emissions and support community groups, local businesses, they're already utilising low carbon technologies, and then they can get involved within their local energy markets instead of the more kind of top-down approach that we've seen over the last 100 years or so. So next slide, please, Hannah. So in terms of here at Electricity Northwest, what we've done so far, we started procuring flexible services in 2018 in June. So it's been 3 years now, and since we've been tendering and procuring various flexible services to help manage congestion and constraints on our network, we've requested a total of 500 megawatts of flexibility, and this has been across 8 different tenders. So we're well established at putting our tenders out there. We have just closed our spring 2021 tender to pre-qualification, but if you did miss out on that and you're interested, we'll be releasing our next tender this autumn, so sometime in September. If you're not already on our distribution list, there'll be a link to sign up at the end of these slides, and you'll be the first to hear about our next tender launch. So all of our requirements are published twice a year in spring and autumn on our website and on the Piccolo Flex platform, which is an online marketplace for trading energy flexibility. On our website, you'll find this interactive flexibility map on the left-hand side. And this shows our current requirements as well as indications of over 70 requirements for the ED2 period of 2023 to 28. And those requirements aren't on the Piccolo Flex platform, they're only on our website. So those are the icons in grey, and then our current requirements will always be shown in navy. So yeah, on our website, you'll find our interactive map, and you'll find all of our tender documentation that you need in order to take part in our tenders. So everything is on our current requirement page. Next slide, please, Hannah. So these are our 4 flexible products or response types that we procure. Sustain and Secure are both pre-fault, and they're scheduled in advance to prevent and manage network constraints. So this could be due to a large power requirement over a period of time, or to help us manage peak loading on the network, such as the 4 to 7 winter peaks that we see. And then there's Dynamic and Restore, and there are post-fault products. So they usually have much lower levels of utilization, and they're unplanned. So we can't give as much advance warning as to when they're going to happen. The key difference between the two is Dynamic is when we've had a fault on the network and we need to maintain the load within the ratings of the asset, whereas Restore, everything is off and we're trying to get them back on. So that really helps us to manage the impact of large interruptions for our customers. Next slide, please, Hannah. So if anyone is interested in taking part in our tenders, this is just like a handy checklist. You can take part if you have an asset in one of our requirement areas that we publish. If you're capable of adjusting how much electricity you consume or generate, and if you can provide a minimum of 50 kilowatts either individually or via an aggregator. So we have reduced that, and we do plan on reducing the minimum requirement again in the future. And then below that, you'll see 5 steps. So this is what you'd have to complete in order to submit a bid. So firstly, you just have to sign up to our DPS, so the Dynamic Purchasing System on Picklow Flex. Register and upload your assets on Picklow Flex, and you can do both of those at any time. It doesn't have to be during one of our tenders in spring and autumn. You can do that anytime during the year. Complete the pre-qualification questionnaire on our website. So this just requires more technical information about your assets that is not asked on Picklow. So we do require you to fill out that pre-qualification questionnaire separately on our website. And then hopefully in the future, Picklow will incorporate that as well. And then after that, we just ask you to confirm your participation in our competition on Picklow. This is a new step that Picklow introduced only in the past month. And I think there has been a bit of confusion where flex providers have done one or the other. So just to stress that you're required to do both. So you fill out the PQQ and then you confirm your participation, or you can choose to withdraw from the competition as well. And then lastly, you can submit a bid if you've completed the first 4 steps successfully. So you submit on Picklow Flex. Next slide, please, Hannah. So we're always looking at ways to improve the procurement process to make it easier to participate. And following feedback from our stakeholders, we started publishing ceiling prices. Hopefully this will make it easier for the bidding stage. Just to give an indication of what we have determined to be an economical cost to procure flexible services, rather than going down the traditional network reinforcement route. We do this using the new CEM, so Common Evaluation Methodology and Tool, and that's being adopted by all DNOs this year. I'm not sure if every DNO used it for this latest tender, but by autumn you should see that all DNOs are using the CEM tool. So yeah, this ceiling price, it's for each site, and that's published in our tender documentation on our website on our current requirements page. And it just shows our an efficient solution and demonstrate value for money, because our primary concern as a DNO is to provide electricity in a safe and secure manner. And then below that, you'll see that we have embedded our pre-qualification questionnaire on our website. As I mentioned earlier, you can now fill this out online. Previously, it was a Word document, so it was a bit trickier for flex providers. So we've put everything online just to make it easier for you, and also to ensure that we receive all the required information in order to allow you to progress to the next stage. And we'll look at that in a little bit more detail on the next slide. So this is a closer look at the pre-qualification questionnaire that's being put online. I would recommend having a look at it beforehand, before the deadline, because sometimes there'll be questions that you'll come across that you might not be sure about, and it just gives you an opportunity to get in touch with us. We do offer one-to-one surgery sessions as well, so you can always book in with a member of our flexible services team and we can go through it with you one-to-one, and just make sure that you're comfortable with all the information you're providing. So yeah, this is the commercial qualification step, the DPS, and then the PQQ is the more technical section more about your assets, and just to make sure that we get all the accurate information that we need. Next slide, please, Hannah. So this slide provides some useful links if you'd like to have a look in your own time. Our latest year in review report outlines how we've honoured our commitment to the ENA, so Energy Network Association's 6 steps for delivering flexible services. And this ensures that all DNOs champion a level playing field to help customers understand the methodologies and procurement processes. We also published our first edition of the Distribution Flexibility Procurement Statement. And anyone new to flexible services, or if you haven't heard about this yet, we'll take a closer look in a minute. But this will be a really good all-rounder document to have a look at. It kind of covers everything. We've also updated our flexible services section, understanding flexible services. So there's a new glossary. We've updated the standard flexibility agreement. You can also view the common evaluation methodology and tool if you're interested in having a look at that to see how we evaluate our ceiling prices. And Introduction to Flexible Services is a really good place to start, again, if you're new to flexible services. So those are links there that you can use when you receive the slide pack if you want to check any of them out. And then looking closer at our flexibility procurement statement, this was introduced following the clean energy package at the end of last year. This was when a new condition was added to our electricity distribution licence, directly related to procurement and the use of distribution flexibility services. We published our statement at the end of March this year, and we're going to do so each year going forward. The statement sets out our intentions for procuring flexibility over the next regulatory year, covering things like engagement, contracts, processes. So if you're new to flexibility, this can be a really useful resource to get that overview all in one document. And next May, this will be supplemented by a procurement report, which is looking back and will detail what we procured and dispatched over the course of the year in comparison to our intentions as stated in this report. So yeah, that's available on our website, so you can read through the whole report. And as I said earlier, it covers everything, so it's a really good resource to have. And then finally, this last slide, if you would like to get in touch with us, you can email us at flexiblecontracts at enwl.co.uk. If you've got any questions, you can get in touch with us there. You can register your asset to be the first to hear about our new requirements. And if your asset falls within one of our requirement areas, we will get in touch with you straight away to let you know that we are looking for flexible services in that area. You can book in for your one-to-one surgery appointment if you have any questions regarding the process of procuring flexibility. Anything at all, just get in touch. And also you can sign up to our distribution list, and that way you will also be the first to hear about the launch of any of our tenders, any updates, industry news, and event invites. So yeah, if you've got any questions, you can get in touch with us. And that's all from me.
Thank you very much, Kate. I shall now hand over to Brian to do our significant code review update.
Right. Good news is I've got visuals back now and I can actually see the slides, which is much better than staring at a blank screen. Okay, so I'm just going to do a brief run through on Ofgem's SCR and just start by explaining what an SCR or a significant code review is. So these are sort of a process that Ofgem have that they can apply where they're in some of the codes that they look after and prescribe, that there are generally sort of open governance arrangements where people can make suggestions and updates to those. But the significant code review is, as the name suggests, is looking at it much more holistically, where they think there are some major reforms needed. And the one that particularly looking at is the access and forward-looking charges SCR, because they have some other ones that they've got in play at the moment. So I'm going to touch on particularly is access and forward-looking charges. Just to explain some of that maybe jargon, is access is what Ofgem referred to the how users actually, as the name suggests, access the electricity network. So that covers what they can import, export, and when, and how rights are actually allocated between different users. And then the second aspect of that, forward-looking charges, as the name suggests, is about the network charges, but particularly looking at how customer behaviour can actually influence charges and what people can actually do, and how their actions can either increase or decrease the charges that they'll be exposed to. And there are a number of aspects of that review. They're looking at the definition and choice between transmission and distribution access rights. They're taking a wide-ranging review of the distribution use system, GEOS charges. They're looking at the connection boundary, which is the one that's highlighted in red because we're going to particularly focus on that today. And they're also reviewing the transmission network use of system, or GEOS charges as well, but we're not really going to cover that today. So in terms of timeline, at the top was the original timeline from Ofgem. They started this and launched it in December 2018. As you can see from that timeline, it's kind of quite a major project, and understandably that's why it's called significant code review. They've tracked that the early stages of that tracked fairly well. They did effectively some what they call long lists of options in the sort of late 2019, and those were done on track. And then in the sort of early spring in 2020, they shortlisted those. Originally, they were then planning to consult in kind of late summer with a view of making a final decision in spring 2021. I think they found some of it, particularly the forward-looking charges, is quite complex and has got quite a major impact on lots of customers. And they've also introduced another project called Full Chain Flexibility that has meant they've suspended a little bit of that. So what they've done is they've consulted on kind of part of the work in terms of summer this year. So this is a live consultation, and the dates and links are on a slide to follow. Particularly looking at some aspects of the original scope, but not all of them, and particularly the connections boundary, which is the one, as I said, I'm going to talk about more today. And the idea is that they're consulting on that now over the summer, and they will make a final decision by the end of 2021, with an implementation date of April 23, when the proposed changes will come into effect. So just, I suppose, just to recap in terms of the sort of terminology used, what is a connections boundary? This is a sort of a very stylized little diagram that sort of shows different premises connecting to the network. There are generally some new extension assets that connect those premises to the existing network, and those are paid for in full by the customer. And if that's all they paid for, then that will be what's known as a shallow connection charge. But currently for distribution, there's what is known as a shallowish connection charge because customers pay for some of the reinforcement needed to actually connect them to the network, if it's at the same voltage level or the one above. But if it goes 2 voltage levels up, then they don't pay for it. The converse of that would be a deep connection charge, where the connecting customer pays for everything right up and including the deeper distribution assets right up to 132 if that was applicable for that project. So that's the kind of the terminology in a simple diagram. In terms of the difference, I mean, there's probably been kind of couple of core reasons why Ofgem have actually looked at this. There are differences between the way distribution and transmission charges actually work in terms of the connection charge. So transmission has got a shallow connection boundary, which means at the time of connection and the connection charge, you only pay for any assets to actually connect your new premises to the existing network, and any wider reinforcement is actually recovered through tenuous charges. So whilst you might pay for them, you don't pay for them as a connection charge. Whereas I've said before, distribution, there's more charges that are included in the connection charge. So they've been often been worried about the differences that can cause maybe some distortion and people choosing to try and connect in one or the other that might not be the most efficient solution because they're just trying to do that to avoid some charges. And then the second concern they've had is about the level of charges, that some of those upfront costs might be detrimental to the rollout of new technologies, particularly the sort of low carbon technologies. So things like heat pumps and electric vehicles being particularly cited, where they're worried about those network charges being acting as a blocker of that deployment of those low carbon technologies over time. So what they plan to do? So they've been considering this since, as I saw before, then that this launched in 2018, and they've published their what's called minded to position. So this is their Ofgem saying this is what we're thinking of doing, and then seeking feedback on it. So they're looking to remove the contribution to reinforcement for demand connections, and then reduce it for distributed generation connections. And then the third aspect is transmission works, where there are charges. Originally, they had thought about actually socialising that, but at the minute they're not going to do that until they've completed the work on dual charging. So in the short term, then what does that mean? So for all demand connections, where currently you might get a charge for any reinforcement, there would be no charges for the reinforcement. For distributed generation, which is obviously more relevant for today's audience, they've moved it the boundary, but not as far as they have done for demand. So that in the proposal is that the connecting customer would pay for any reinforcement at the same voltage as the point of connection. So if you were connecting at HV, you would pay for any HV reinforcement, but now in this proposal you wouldn't pay for any EHV reinforcement, which you currently would. They're also proposing to keep the high cost cap as well, so that covers extreme situations where there's a lot of reinforcement for the size of the load. And then they've clarified how they expect storage to work, and basically it would get assessed both for the import and export, and whichever, if either the import or the export then triggered the reinforcement, the rules above would follow. So if it was the import, then there would be no charge for reinforcement, but if it was an export that was precipitating the reinforcement, then there would be a charge if it was at the same voltage level. And as I said, the transmission charges, if there are any charges for the national grid works, then that would be passed through to the connections customer as now. So in terms of the consultation, as mentioned, it was published on the 30th of June, and it's open to the 25th of August. So it covers the distribution connection charging that I've talked about. It also covers some options on definition of access rights, about things like time limited, etc., and a bit about tenuous charging for small distributed generators that I've not covered today. There's a link there to the Ofgem's consultation, we are going to be running a longer separate session on this that will go through the other aspects of it at the beginning of August, if anybody's interested in learning a little bit more about it. Okay, so I'll pause there in case there are any questions on the SCR.
Hi, Brian. It's Pete Aston here. How are you?
Hello, Pete. I'm very well, thank you.
Nice to see you and hear you. I was just wondering if ENW, thanks for sharing. I was just wondering if ENW had any specific thoughts themselves as to whether this was a good thing or a bad thing or an indifferent to it, in terms of sort of forwarding connections and so on.
Yeah, I mean, we're still sort of formulating our response to Pete. I think in general we probably support it. We can see that it actually will give us probably more flexibility in terms of how we actually can design and respond to a network. One of the disadvantages has been about the current connection boundary arrangements, which it's kind of got pros and cons with it. It provides a locational signal for customers, so they will tend to, particularly DG, not try and connect where there's not much capacity. The move to, but it means that you're very responsive, and every assessment we're doing is responding to that individual one. Whereas it'll give us a bit more flexibility to actually try and have more holistic solutions, and will probably help, what Kate was describing in terms of the flexible solutions, in terms of flexible services, might create greater possibilities for those to be actually used. So they're not without, it's not without problems. The original concept from Ofgem was that they were going to launch them both at the same time, so they would change the connection boundary, and there would be also some changes to the way GEOS charges would work, but they haven't finished that bit of work yet. So the kind of, I suppose, principle or intent of that was there may be some charges to reflect the higher levels of reinforcement that go through the customers, but they would go through GEOS, but they've not completed that bit of work yet. So it's actually unclear exactly how that's going to work in totality, because they haven't completed that really.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Brian.
Okay.
Hi, Brian. We do have a question from Morgan. So Morgan,
so how do you think transformers will be treated in terms of reinforcement contribution, e.g. a 33 kV generation connection triggers new 13233 BSP transformer grids, would they need to contribute? Yeah, good question. I don't know for sure. There's a bit of that detail to be worked out. I would have thought in the principle that you only pay at the voltage level that you're connecting. If you're connecting at 33, then you wouldn't pay for the transformers. I guess there'll be a mute point about the kind of the 33 breakers, because that's at the same voltage level. So that there's a bit of that detail, Morgan, to actually be worked out. I'd have expected not to pay for the transformers, but the 33 switch gear is more of a maybe. But that's some of that detail will exactly need to be worked out. In principle, I think probably not, but you don't know. That's as I said, exactly some of the detail that's going to need to be worked up, and the questions to pose back to Ofgem to seek that clarity, because when you get into the detailed implementation of this, there'll be exactly all those things that we need to get complete clarity on. But that's a good question. We're having some sort of discussions with Ofgem sort of informally to raise things from the DNOs as queries as we come up with them, rather than wait for the formal consultation. So that's a good one. I'll feed into that process. Okay, any other questions? Okay, right, so the next lot is just talk a little bit about ED2 and business plans for ED2. So this is I suppose a graphic of Nick from Ofgem that shows their sort of road to ED2 and the journeys that have been the sort of steps along the way to that. So as you can see, it's started back in August 19, where they published an open letter, and then in sort of 19 and 20 they went through a number of sort of methodology steps to set out their kind of the framework for it, and back in last year then got to their what was called their methodology decision that sets out the framework. And then basically we go through a sort of a process where we submit draft plans to Ofgem, which we've just done, and we're just kind of at that was done at the beginning of July, and then we'll be submitting a final business plan in the 1st of December, and then there are some open hearings, and Ofgem go through a determination process where they do a draft, and then a final determination prior to the period starting in April 2023. So as I said, 1st of July was a kind of a major milestone, because that was the submission of all the DNO business plan submissions to Ofgem. Interestingly, there's been no requirement to actually publish, and there's probably been a spectrum of levels of degrees of things published. Ourselves at WPD actually published a sort of I don't know what you call a draft plan before a draft plan, an early draft plan. So we'd actually made that visible to stakeholders to try and get feedback on it. I think there's quite a few companies most companies have published their main document, which is a kind of about a 200-page document. The exception is UK Power Networks that have only published a short, about 25-page executive summary. And then most companies have published supporting appendices as well. I think we've published the most, I think. So we had a draft plan. There were 36 annexes, 174 data tables, 44 engineering justification papers, and 21 cost benefit analysis. So a whole raft of stuff. That's a picture of our plan, and the link to it if you wish to read. And then there's a kind of just a little summary there that actually, I suppose, pulls out some of the highlights of it in terms of spend, number of trees planted, etc. That I wasn't going to go through, but it gives you a bit of I suppose, an insight into what our £2 billion of investment over that 5-year period is looking to actually deliver. So please take some time to actually have a look at that. Let us know what you think. There's like a infographics like that, and there's a executive summary in the document as well. That means you can read the shorter version of it. So that'll be something that will be maybe of interest. It covers things like network investment as well, so that might be of interest to people. In terms of the sort of specific connections, then DNOs are required to submit what's called a major connection strategy, and that covers any market segments that didn't pass the competition test in 2013. And the graphic there top right just shows that. So the green are where DNOs have actually passed, the reds where they didn't pass, and the grey are where they didn't submit. So we were the most successful DNO at that time and passed 7 out of the 9 market segments, and then a kind of a range down to SSEN, who in one of their areas didn't pass any. So there's a complete continuum, and I'll talk a little bit more about what Ofgem are doing to refresh that in a minute. So what that means for us is that we've got those 2 market segments that we didn't pass, which are distributed generation low voltage and unmetered other. So for us, these are kind of 2 quite small market segments that probably are the 2 of them are probably less than 5% of our connections activity in Electricity North West. So they're kind of quite small, but we've got to go through this sort of regulatory process for them, and we've also got to provide a major connection strategy for the non-contestable activities as well as in all the DNOs. So when you look at ours. I think that's got. I'll cover that in a minute. Yeah, so when you look at our plan, because it's only covering a little bit, it might look shorter and more succinct than some of the other DNOs because they're covering the whole gambit of all the connections activities. I'll not go through this in detail. It's just more for reference when you get the slides later. This just gives you an extract from the business plan guidance of what DNOs need to cover in the major connection strategy. So it's basically what are the issues that you see in your area, what's your plan for addressing them, and putting deliverables in place to actually try and meet those and actually make sure it's been done with stakeholder engagement. And to support that, Ofgem set out a number of based on expectations that set, I suppose, a minimum set of standards of things that Ofgem would expect, and those fall under three principles that largely cover the kind of the three generic stages, the kind of pre-application, so mainly about providing information to support the pre-application process. Then principle 2 covers the actual connection offer process, getting a quote, and then the third is the actual delivery of the actual connection. And there are say 20 odd based on expectations that sit under each of those. That's a copy of our plan and a link there if you want to follow it to have a look. So it sets out in it what we're going to do for customers, the feedback we've had, and how well we meet the expectations now, and how we propose to measure success. So whilst I know this, it's mainly focused at low voltage DG. If you do get a few minutes to have a look, please let us know. If there's any feedback you've got, that would be really, really welcome, because this is our submission that we've made for a draft plan, but we'll be doing another one at the beginning of December. So we'll be looking to engage a bit further with the stakeholders to try and get some extra feedback in it before we finalise that for our 1st of December submission to Ofgem. I think that's the last slide on that, and just a couple of slides just in terms of what Ofgem are doing to kind of review the level of competition. As I mentioned, the requirement to submit the major connection strategies is based on the 2013 assessment of competition. Ofgem rightly realised, well, things have moved on since then, and that position maybe doesn't really reflect the reality. And certainly anecdotally, other DNOs have said that they see much higher levels of competition now than they did in 2013. So Ofgem are proposing a process to kind of review that. So again, they've published another consultation. This one went out on the 18th of June with a closing date of the 13th of August. And really this covers their proposals as to how they're going to carry out that assessment. And it's effectively largely an assessment based on data, and we'll cover the data on the next slide. But their consultation asks 13 questions that cover every part of the process as to what they're doing and why, and just seeking feedback on that. So there's a link on the slide that'll take you to the actual consultation. So just covering it in a nutshell, they're looking at the areas where there wasn't effective competition in 2013. So it was all those ones that were either red or grey in a few slides ago, and they are going to look at what they sort of considered to be the kind of key indicators of effective competition. So that's really looking at the kind of, I suppose, outcomes in terms of the quantifiable metrics in terms of market share. So they're going to look at effectively market share based on number of offers that are issued, number of acceptances that are actually made between third parties and DNO, and they're going to look at that in terms of numbers, and they're also going to look at it by capacity as well. So it means that if there's lots of competition, the higher end, there might be a small number of jobs, third parties are one, but they might be very big. So it measures that the two quantums really of kind of size and volume of them. And they're also going to look at the number of third parties that are engaging and the value of acceptances as well. So the outcome of that review will be to look at what aspects are financially incentivized in ED2. So the market segments where DNOs have to do a major connection strategy are, well, financially incentivized, but they're likely, I think, to be like ICE, which is a penalty only. So if DNOs are not providing good service to customers, it could be exposed to a financial penalty. There may be a possibility that there will be some upside in that, but that's one of the consultation questions. Personally, I'm not sure that will actually happen, but I'm fairly sure that there will be a financial penalty aspect to it, but the reward bit is less certain in my mind. And also it might make changes to the margin that DNOs can actually charge as well in those market segments if there is a level of competition. So, well, as I said, we'll circulate the slides, and there's some links there if you want to go and have a look. So before I go, hand over to Gavin, was any questions on that whistle stop tour through sort of ED2 and business plans and competition test reruns? Okay, thank you. I've stopped sharing. Has that stopped it from showing the slides now? I need to reshare.
Yes, it has.
I thought I was pressing stop presenting, but I've obviously stopped sharing as well by accident. Apologies for that.
Whilst Brian is pulling up the slides again, does anyone have any comments or questions on any of the presentations we've had so far? So that is a no. Thank you.
So did you want me to share them, Hannah? Because I think were you not sharing them?
I can do that. Bear with me then. Keep loading.
You want me to stop? Have you got them? I think I've got them now.
I've got them. So let me just find the right slide. Okay, so can everyone see National Grid Regional Development Plans?
Yes, thank you.
Yep, let's come up now.
Perfect.
If I just take control of that, Hannah, that should
Yes.
let me whip through them. Right, great. Good morning, everyone. My name's Gavin Anderson. I'm one of the many hats that I wear within the strategic planning team is to look after the technical relationship with regard to our transmission interface with National Grid. And hopefully you can see there's quite a lot of detail on that slide, but in 2018, E&W moved all of our GSPs over to the Appendix G process for managing headroom availability with National Grid ESO. We effectively provide monthly updates to Grid with adding projects in that are accepted and remove projects that cancel. And this works quite well. It allows us to move the projects team and ladle across the headroom that we have available. As we carry this out every month, It allows us to keep a close eye on that headroom availability, and then also update our heat map tool, which is published on our website each month with a clear picture of what headroom is available at each GSP from a transmission point of view. Headroom is allocated in 50 megawatt chunks, and when this is exhausted, we move the projects into a project progression, and basically ask National Grid to carry out a detailed system study to identify if transmission reinforcement is required, or if more headroom can be made available through maybe network reorganisation or some other clever stuff that Grid have hiding in the background. A recent development on this is to move forward into regional development programmes. Now, an RDP is a detailed system study that is focused locally on a sort of per GSP basis, and it looks at the whole DG that is connected in that area. It's aimed in areas where transmission reinforcement has maybe been triggered or is likely to be triggered going forward. Examines the whole situation and takes into effectively looking to find out what is the best solution for connection in that area. Now, that may be an asset build solution is the best option, but it may also be that there's an operational solution or a flexible and managed connection option that can be made available to allow connectees to move forward. This is all summarised up through in a big cost benefit analysis is carried out to ultimately determine which which road is the best to go down with that option. So we've been working with National Grid, and they've now created a forum of all DNOs to sort of almost standardise this process and derive like a set of solutions that can be applied to specific areas and types of gen that's going forward. And NGSEO have recently published on their website a bit of a fact sheet. Again, you'll be able to pick up that link when you see the slides. Which all DNOs have sort of signed up to, and it gives you a very high-level overview of the process and lets you sort of see into some of the ideas going forward in this area. So far, E&W have agreed one RDP at Heysham to enable the connection of a couple of large generators via this process. And I think as areas become more constrained in the future, this option is always going to be sort of analysed as part of a project progression process. I think that's Grid's idea, is to get this process up and running and embed it into part of the BAU almost on it. Just to very sort of quickly summarise through Heysham. So our site there at Heysham GSP, we have two bulk supply points in Lancaster and a primary at Trimble fed off of Heysham grid supply point. But there already is over 475 megawatts of DG connected, as there are a number of large offshore wind farms come on shore here. We've got Walney and Ormond and another one that escapes my mind. So when we looked at a couple of new connections who were going to come on board onto our network, when we spoke to Grid, they were immediately intimating that asset reinforcement through an additional SGT onto the bars was the likely proposed solution. They've took it away, looked at the RDP process, and effectively developed up a situation via constraint management network to offer connection onto the grid without waiting for that SGT reinforcement. This has allowed the applicants to maybe get onto the network a little bit sooner than they had to wait for an SGT build out. Since we've signed up to that, we've had recent acceptances in the area which have now triggered a phase 2 RDP, and that's ongoing with Grid at the moment, and we're awaiting the outcome of that, which is due in August this year. So the regional development programme is likely to be a common feature going forward as DG increases, and E&W welcome the approach to assist with DG connections and will engage and work with the SO to continue development. Though we do realise, of course, that this may not suit all parties, and that's something that we keep in mind when we enter into our discussions with them. Now, the main sort of point of this little segment is to say that the SO have offered a bit of a joint webinar coming up, possibly September time, and we're looking to gauge and find out if there's any advice, any guys who are keen to sort of come on board with that and learn a bit more about the technical requirements, the route to market, and also it would be a great opportunity to quiz Grid on the processes behind this. And I think it'd be quite useful for us all to maybe sit down and have that chat going forward. Like I say, they're looking to do something sort of mid-September, and if that's something that interests anyone on this call, please drop Hannah or myself or anyone on the call line, and we can get that set up and take it forward. And like I say, a very whistle-stop review, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them on.
Hi there, it's Peter Aston here from Road Knight Taylor. I used to be head of system planning for WPD until 5 weeks ago, so I know what it's like from your side of the table. Just a quick question. It was only a specific one on the Haitian one, but it might just be an interesting test case. You mentioned that there are some constraints being implemented through the RDP. I just wondered what sort of constraints they were.
Yeah, so with our system up at Haitian, the specific case where there's a problem is that when Grid enter an N-2 situation. So I'll flip the slide back. There's 3 SGTs, and when they lose 2 of the SGTs, there's only 1 left to maintain the network. With it being a critical supply as well, the nuclear power station is fed off of that GSP as well.
Yeah.
So there's a difficult safety case on there. So the constraint is effectively the N-2 is the challenge, and in the studies, Grid determined that was actually a 1 in 100 year occurrence. There was a probability of that popping up. So it's a very small occurrence, but it's something they've got to plan for on the network to make sure that it's secured just in case that does once in 100 year pop up. So obviously at that point, we would then start looking to constrain generation off to bring the reverse power flow down less than the single SGT that's left in service.
And would that constraint be implemented through some sort of intertrip?
Yeah, effectively. The idea is to connect the guys into. We have a Haitian overload protection scheme that exists in Haitian, and the new connectees would effectively be wired into that, which is a telecontrol system to immediately disconnect their output should that situation arrive on site at the GSP.
Okay, thanks for that. Appreciate that.
No problem. Any more?
Okay, thank you,
That's
Gavin.
Great, thanks. I'll hand you back to Hannah.
Okay. So, as I say, there's a slight addition to the end of this presentation with regards accelerated loss of mains change programme. I'm sure the vast majority of you are familiar with this, but I did want to just put in a little bit of detail for anyone who perhaps isn't, and really just to let people know that the opportunity, there's a window open currently. So to give a little bit of background, Engineering Recommendation G59 put in place a change programme for people to look at the loss of mains protections at their existing generation sites. And you've got 2 kinds of protection, of which vector shift is the sort of older version. And the change programme is to encourage as many generators to replace or adjust their protection to bring it up to spec. And what the change programme has done has put in place some funding to help generators make that change. So, as I say, there's been a number of windows of opportunity for people to apply for funding to do these changes on their protection. This is the 7th out of 11 windows. We've pleased to say that there's 357 applications that have been accepted, and you can see there's some more statistics there, but I guess the most interesting one is the 932,000 in payments already made. So this graphic is just a brief one to say ultimately there's still quite a lot of funding available in terms of generators on the network. There are a number who haven't applied. Now, there are a host of people who are already compliant in that they have the ROC-off type protection, but there is, as you can see in the graphic, a large proportion who haven't or don't appear to have applied. And the key thing is that any generators that are not compliant with the new regulations from September 2022 will be subject to enforcement, and the funding will not be there. So you will, any generators would need to fund the changes themselves. So this is just a very brief presentation just to let you know that the window is open again, and details are available on our website. And we are encouraging people to apply. So this slide just gives you the process of what to do if you are looking to apply for funding. So there's lots of details on our website. The basic process is check if you qualify, go onto ENA, apply through that, make the change, and liaise with ourselves if it's in our patch. And once you've submitted the evidence, you should get paid accordingly. We have done some changes to our website recently. I'm hoping to give you a little bit more detail and a bit more information. Links are there, and the key things is we've done a new guide and a new compliance notification, which is an online form, hopefully making it easier for you to let us know. Okay, any questions on accelerated loss rates? Okay, so we now open up the panel for any questions or answers from any of our presenters today, or some of our colleagues who haven't presented but have joined us. So as I say, we've got Victoria Brown, we've got John Carlisle, and we've got Stefan Jones with us today as well. Feel free to raise your hand or unmute if you do have any questions. Okay. In which case, without further ado, I would like to thank you ever so much for your time today. I hope it's been useful. I would urge you to fill out the survey just to let us know which of the presentations were most useful, how you found the webinar overall today, and if there's any comments you have on how we could improve our events going forward, that'd be much appreciated. As I say, slides will be sent out and will be published on our website. And just as another reminder, we do have the SCR, the Significant Code Review, coming up very shortly on the 4th of August. I checked this morning, the registration isn't available on our website just yet, but should go on today. And obviously, if you want to get in touch, there's the ICE mailbox or any of your usual contacts within Electricity North West. And without any further ado, thank you again and have a lovely day.